And our program guest this morning is the Industry and Innovation Minister, Greg Combet. But before that, we'll take a look at the papers around the country. And Annabelle, two by-elections in South Australia yesterday and no joy for the Labor Party.
Yes, this is the vanishing vapour trail of former Premier Mike Rann and former Treasurer Kevin Foley in a sort of beautifully coordinated movement. They had both their by-elections, one in the seat of Ramsay and one in the seat of Port Adelaide, on the same day, yesterday. Now, Labor's squeaked home in both seats but had a horrible scare in Port Adelaide. Very, very safe seat, which had a huge swing against the government.
It's about 10%, was it?
Yeah, that's right, and there was a significant swing at the last state election too. So cumulatively over those two polls, you've got quite a big movement. Susan Close, who's the candidate in Port Adelaide, has scraped home, but she had a lot of support during the campaign from Jay Weatherill. So it's not a massive vote of confidence in the new Labor government. Although I think there were like pretty substantial local development issues, and she was opposed by a very popular local mayor as well.
But Isabel Redmond, the opposition leader, doesn't do well in the opinion polls. So what's the lesson there, that you can have an unpopular opposition leader, but if the swing is on, the swing is on?
Well, yeah, it is, except that in this case you needed two independents. I mean, the opponents in those by-elections are actually independents, not Liberals. So the best way to beat a state Labor government in this circumstance seems to be to enlist somebody else to help. Yeah.
Now, Malcolm, the lobbyist Bruce Hawker is identified in one of the newspapers as the architect behind the Rudd push.
Well, Mr Hawker would probably want you to know that A, he's not being paid by Kevin Rudd to run any campaign, etc. B, as he said in that story, he hasn't been approaching independents on Mr Rudd's behalf. He said that publicly. But I think he'd also like you to know that he thinks the Gillard government is a complete stinker. And he's now becoming more and more overt, more public with his criticisms of Julia Gillard and his support for Kevin Rudd. The significance of this is that Bruce Hawker, whilst he's been out chasing the consultant's dollar for many years now, was very much part of the Labor Party in New South Wales, worked for Bob Carr. Mike Rann in South Australia worked for him. He's helping the Queensland state election. So this guy isn't a blow-in. He's very much part of the Australian Labor Party, and he's saying more and more publicly, more and more firmly, that he thinks Julia Gillard is a goner.
The story there, though, quotes some ministers saying that he sees the return of Kevin Rudd as an employment opportunity. Well,
he has proved that he can turn a dollar, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did see it as an employment opportunity. But it's still pretty risky of him to do it if he thinks that's all he's going to get out of it. He is putting himself on the line.
Now, David Moe, what is it about the seat of Dobell, Craig Thompson's seat? Now the Liberal candidate is in the news.
Yes, we discovered from the Sunday Telegraph today that Gary Whittaker, the Liberal candidate for the seat, has been living in a shed. What's more, living in a shed without council permission. Now, I don't think this is particularly unusual on the central coast of New South Wales, but we learn about this, I suspect, because there is an awful shitfight out on the right of the New South Wales Liberal Party about this man. They don't want him as the Liberal candidate. The right and the ultra-right were fighting it out over the selection of a candidate for this seat, and Mr Whittaker came up through the middle.
He slipped through the middle with his caravan.
He slipped... No, don't ruin the ending of this story. He slipped through the middle and was living in the shed. Now, I think we learn about this today because the right and the ultra-right have united to undermine Mr Whittaker and sort of try to show him as a rather dishonest man. He has left the shed, you'll be glad to know, and has moved to the Tuon Bay Caravan Park. But, you know, my view is he could beat Craig Thompson if he was living in a hole.
This whole thing, though, arouses in me the most profound confusion about the political advantage or disadvantage of living in a shed. Because, I mean, like, once you're... apparently, living in a shed is a bar to getting elected.
But this is the log cabin of Australia.
Once they do get elected, they can't stop banging on about how they grew up in a shed.
That's right.
But also, that's the worst you can find about a bloke that is
living in a shed. Yeah. And it's actually not a bad-looking shed.
He's
got 3 roller doors.
He's a perfect conscript for Tim Matheson's Men's Sheds project, is he? Not?
Now, next week we should
yes,
see a
Barry.
vote on private health insurance.
Yes,
And the significant issue here, and the government seems to be confident that they now have the numbers to get this through. But Tony Abbott yesterday upped the ante on this issue. Here he is.
I say to the independent members of Parliament, your job is to keep the bastards honest, not to allow the bastards to get away with dishonesty. So we will be fighting Gillard's health tax every inch of the way in the Parliament.
To reinstate it.
We're going to fight it. We're going to fight it. Ask me that question if we come to that situation. We are going to fight this.
So Annabelle is saying you can't let the bastards get away with this, but the independents, do you think, are ready to support it?
Well, it looks that way. I mean, this is the first dividend of the Slipper defection, really, because they went from needing 4 extra votes to needing 3, with his slipperiness enthroned upon the regal chair. Now they're actually in a position to get it across the line. I mean, it was Kevin Rudd who first announced in the, I think, 2009 budget, or was it 2010 budget? 2010, I think, that they were going to means test the private health insurance rebate. So it can't be suggested that this hasn't been taken to an election. It's been attempted several years on the trot, and it now looks like Julia Gillard's government will get it through as a reform.
David?
Well, it looks as though they're going to get it through. What beats me is, is there a single argument for giving the rich in this country a subsidy for their private health insurance? No, there's not.
Well, there is. Get them out of the public health system and take pressure off there.
They don't need it.
Is that where the $2.4 billion is going to go?
It didn't work. It didn't work. What worked to get the rich paying their private health premiums was telling them that they were going to have an added impost on their taxes if they didn't. That worked. This never worked. It simply drained huge amounts of money out of the public purse, had no health outcome at all, but was, of course, a gift, a gesture of goodwill, a thank you to the private health industry, which had backed the Liberal Party through thick and thin, and always has backed the Liberal Party through thick and thin.
And short-term, it amounts to about $750 million, which is half the budget surplus that Wayne Swan has promised.
Look, it's important to the budget, that's for sure. The independents, keep an eye on them. Tony Windsor has some doubts about it. He says he's unlikely to support it. I mean, they could still get it through without...
He's not one of the votes there counting
without
on,
Tony Windsor, but he does have influence on the others. We'll see what happens
there. There's a certain amount of Oakshottian wiggle room too, which is always something to keep an eye on.
The Greens also are against... They'll support it, but they're against that part of it, which is the penalties for not having private health. But... two factors must be remembered. One is the last budget had a freeze on indexation and a means testing of family payments worth $2 billion that left Tony Abbott spluttering with anger and screaming against class warfare. And in fact, the opposition didn't vote against it. It supported it once it got to Parliament. This is probably likely to happen.
You can't see them. You can't see them restoring it.
No, because it is
indefensible.
It is a huge subsidy to a single industry worth nearly $5 billion a year, and I recommend people, if they can, to see an analysis by Mike Steckity in yesterday's Australian, which shows it wasn't even pivotal in getting people to move to private health insurance, which was the objective. There are other factors that caused that shift beyond this.
All right, we have to move on. That is the Sunday Papers, and we'll go to our program guest now, the Industry and Innovation Minister, Greg Combet, who joins us from Canberra.